So thank you for your patience, everybody, and good evening, everyone. Bonjour à tous. Thank you for joining us for this virtual Black, Indigenous, and racialized budget consultation session. Though this meeting is being held remotely and we are meeting virtually, the land on which Ottawa is built is unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that the peoples of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. The City of Ottawa honors the peoples and the land of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, and the City of Ottawa honors all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. Before we begin, here are a few housekeeping items. As you might have noted, I did start the recording of this session, and as is typical practice, we do ensure that the video is posted online through our communication channels. So we just request that if you do not want to appear on the screen in a recording, please just turn off your camera. You'll still be able to ultimately pose any comments or questions in the Zoom chat. Please ensure that you place your microphone on mute until a moderator invites you to ask a question. And let's ensure that we respect each other and also the agenda that is specifically examining ways to enhance equity and equity concerns in the city's budget process. So we want to stay on topic today. Today, we will be receiving a presentation and hearing from the city's finance department concerning the budget. So I'd like to welcome and thank Isabel Jasmine for joining us this evening to provide a detailed presentation on the budget. But before we do, it is important to note that over the past 3 years, the city has been focused on improving equity through its anti-racism strategy. So I'll ask my staff members to launch a presentation on that strategy. But I'm actually pleased to report that the proposed upcoming 2023 city budget will have additional dollars for its implementation. And after a period of consultation, Council ultimately approved its first anti-racism strategy in 2020, or last summer actually, in 2022. And it's a 5-year plan to proactively identify and remove systemic barriers in city policies, programs, and services, and to realize the vision of racial equity. The strategy proposes an action plan with 7 areas of focus, with 28 recommendations and 132 actions to be implemented over the next 5 years. And the Anti-Racism Secretariat has planned to officially launch the strategy this March, on March 21st, 2023, to coincide with and in recognition of the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So please ensure that you put that on your calendars. We will have a launch event and programming and more opportunities for comment and input on the strategy. The strategy does, in terms of its launch, mark the continuation of the city's efforts to communicate with the community its commitment to anti-racism and the journey ahead to integrate racial equity into city operations. So I will ask my staff to launch the slides around the strategy, if that's possible.
I have it as a PDF, but I will also put it in the chat as well. But I'll launch what I have right now, Councillor, if that's okay.
Excellent. Thank you, that's great. And if we can move to slide 2. So while elements of this strategy will address systemic barriers impacting Indigenous, Black, and other racialized residents in Ottawa, a proposed action item of the strategy is to work in collaboration with the newly formed Indigenous Relations Branch to engage with Indigenous service leaders, community leaders, elders, and youth, whose voices will shape an Indigenous-focused anti-racism strategy and build on the work currently being done in the Ottawa Indigenous community, such as the Indigenous Specific Racism and Discrimination Report released by Wabano Health Centre, outlined in partnership with the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition. So work will continue there. The next slide, please. The strategy provides a roadmap to achieve racial equity through a coordinated, trauma-informed, and systems-wide approach to ensure that the people of Ottawa, irrespective of their racial identities, have equitable access to city programs, services, resources, and opportunities. And it takes an inward look at the workplace culture in response to the experiences of the Indigenous, Black, and racialized staff within the city. First, in recognizing the historical and ongoing impacts of colonialism experienced by Indigenous communities. Second, in recognition of Canada's history of enslavement, racial segregation, and systemic oppression against the Black community, producing a form of racism so deeply entrenched in our institutions and practices, often in ways that have become invisible, yet continue to have a harmful effect on Black populations across Canada. As such, the city is proposing explicitly applying monitoring and evaluation metrics against the impacts and the outcomes of this proposed strategy in Black communities. Next slide, please. Our proposed strategy responds to the more than 1,000 voices who contributed their time, shared their stories, and informed the necessary actions that the city needs to pursue in addressing racial inequities. In the last 18 months, the city has heard from Ottawa residents and city staff through community consultation, action planning sessions, town halls, and online surveys. The city has completed environmental scans of anti-racism strategies across different sectors, varying levels of government and industries to capture emerging and wise practices. And the city established a community anti-racism advisory table with 17 highly engaged leaders from across Ottawa to advise and guide our process, providing community context and insight into emerging racial issues. And we established an internal planning table with representation of city staff from every department across the corporation to translate the conversations that were held into concrete action items. The next slide, please. The city is looking to create a fundamental shift in how we do work at the city by introducing an anti-racism approach through a series of questions, and these guiding principles, which aim to ensure racial equity and sustainability, are integrated into how we plan at the city, how we operate, how we allocate resources, evaluate the work that we do, and most importantly, how we engage with one another. The next slide, please. The strategy proposes an action plan with 7 areas of focus, as I had said earlier, 28 recommendations, and 132 actions to be implemented over the next 5 years. We're proud that each and every department across the city as a corporation has committed to implementing actions to achieve racial equity at the city. These actions are in direct response to community and staff consultation, are mindful of current departmental ability, and in most instances within departmental budgets. This action plan seeks to improve representation in governance and leadership, enhance access to high quality, culturally responsive community-based services, and create welcoming environments within children and youth development programming. It will advise and implement methods to increase representation on our agencies, boards, commissions, and advisory committees by raising awareness of governance opportunities and creating a city governance guide to encourage more involvement of racialized communities in governance discussions. The Strategy also works to update our appointment policy and recruitment strategy to ensure equitable representation of Black and other racialized communities for council appointed citizen members. And the strategy will also provide operating or capital funding to private and non-for-profit sector stakeholders for the acquisition of affordable housing assets for racialized groups, including the expansion of the Black-led family housing pilot. It will also encourage the creation of housing that represents various familiar structures in future procurement or in the provision of funding for the acquisition of existing private housing assets that may be converted to affordable housing. And it will enhance the environment within the shelter system for cultural, religious, gender, and sexual orientation of Black and other racialized groups. The strategy and the action plan will also provide better support for Black and racialized owned businesses with information resources and programs such as incubation and co-working spaces and entrepreneurship training. Targeted training to navigate the city's procurement processes will also be included, applications and deadlines, etc. It will also establish criteria to evaluate community impact so that bidders can demonstrate their commitment to social and community impacts, such as racial diversity within their organization, and earn additional points towards a city contract. We heard several themes emerge from the engagement undertaken with city staff and actions in the proposed strategy to respond to experiences of racism in the workplace, learning resources on racism for city staff and leaders, and processes that include anti-racism and anti-oppression policies to remove the burden associated with reporting incidents of racism. The city under this plan will commit to training, learning modules, workshops, and support for city leaders, for leadership, for all city leadership, all city staff, and city council to deepen their anti-racism competencies and support the application of an anti-racism approach to their work. The city will commit to integrating evidence-supported, trauma-informed organizational approaches to introduce the practice of cultural humility and ensure all voices are heard and considered. And we're going to develop an anti-racism and anti-oppression policy to enhance processes to report incidences of racism. The city is also going to commit to assess how Indigenous, Black, and racialized staff are accessing, benefiting, and moving through programs for recruitment, hiring, coaching, and succession planning, and by partnering with professional organizations to enhance mentoring and networking opportunities for Indigenous, Black, and racialized staff. Concerning institutional practices, there are a number of actions that cut across the corporation and are in response to general community feedback or the rise in overt symbols of hate, discrimination, and racism in our city. This strategy commits to further dialogue to enhance and to address anti-Asian racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, as well as unique experiences of those with intersecting identities, such as racialized women, gender diverse persons, members of the two-spirited, lesbian, gay, bi, and trans communities, and people living with disabilities, and newcomers and new immigrants. Next slide, please. We are proposing a phased approach towards implementation of the strategy. In phase one, we established the foundation for this work through extensive learning at all levels of the organization. We know many people feel uncomfortable or ill-equipped to talk about race or fear that talking about it will only make things worse. And this came through in terms of the staff consultation. We believe the first step is about bringing people together to talk honestly about race to ensure we have the intercultural competencies, awareness, knowledge, skills, and ability to address racial inequities and position us towards organizational and cultural shifts. The first phase will also focus on gender and race disaggregated data practices that will form the baseline against which we can measure the impact of all future actions and further refine strategies to support meaningful engagement and relationship. There will be a greater emphasis on the implementation of action items in governance youth development, achieving racial equity in the workplace and institutional practices. The second phase will start following a midterm review to evaluate, modify, and course correct as needed. So we could see this in the midterm of this strategy. From this review, the city will continue to implement the actions, deepen our ability to apply the anti-racism approach in program design, policy development, and service delivery. And the next slide, please. The Anti-Racism Secretariat will support the city departments to ensure anti-racism work and actions are mainstreamed in all the work at the city. The Anti-Racism Advisory Table will continue to play a key advisory role to the city through the implementation of the strategy. So in year one of the strategy, I'm pleased that the focus will include capacity building to ground the organization in common understanding of systemic racism and its impact on Indigenous, Black, and other racialized communities, with space for ongoing awareness training, education, and trauma-informed, courageous conversations about race, racism, and anti-racism principles amongst all city staff. The first year will also include community engagement to employ the voices and lived experiences of the multiple diverse communities regarding the actions within the strategy. And the key, of course, is ensuring that we start to build a framework around race disaggregated data collection so that we can work on the corporate data governance framework to apply a racial equity lens and incorporate best practices to collect and analyze race disaggregated data and other social demographic data. So I'm really pleased that we've made a tremendous amount of progress in my capacity as council liaison for anti-racism and ethnocultural relations initiatives at the city, that we've seen the establishment since my election of an anti-racism office, as well as work that was undertaken for 2 years on a strategy with a tremendous amount of community consultation. And I'm absolutely pleased that this year's budget, the proposed budget, will contain a budget line of $250,000 additional dollars to continue to advance the work on the strategy. So just wanted to provide an update on where we're at. And in terms of this budget, I just want to ensure residents that we're not just outlining a strategy. We have concrete actions, and we're going to continue to see investments in terms of the budget. With that, I'll leave it there, and we'll entertain all questions at the end of this presentation. But with that, we will receive a presentation about the city's 2023 city budget from Isabel Jasmine.
Thank you, Councillor. Just wait for the slides. Perfect. So good evening. My name is Isabel Jasmine, and I'm the Deputy City Treasurer, Corporate Finance. Today, I'm here representing the City of Ottawa Finance Services Department to provide an overview of the budget process. Next slide. So there's an overarching framework for determining how much needs to be collected from taxes to pay for city services. To ensure that the budget remains affordable, the best place to start is with a tax target. The city estimates and determines any increases to expenditures resulting from inflation, increases from collective agreements, changes in regulation or legislation, growth to service new neighborhoods, and changes in funding from other levels of government. These are then offset by savings from efficiencies that can be achieved from operations, increases in revenues from fees that are charged directly to users of city services, and taxes from new assessment that particularly help to pay for increased operating and infrastructure costs to service those new neighborhoods. Next slide. In 2023, the total draft operating budget for the city is $4.5 billion. Much of the operating budget, nearly 60%, is made up of 4 key services, which are the water and sewer, police services, transit, and community and social services. As you will see on the next slide, much of the cost of these services come from sources other than tax. For example, water and sewer is paid for by revenue from water bills. Less than half of transit operating costs are paid for by fare revenue, and over 80% of community and social services are paid for by provincial and federal funding. Next slide. Here you can see that 50% of the revenue comes from taxes and payment in lieu of taxes. 23% comes from federal and provincial grants, and 22% comes from fees and charges, for example, the water bill, transit fares, parks and recreational fees, etc. Next slide. For 2023, the draft capital budget is $1.06 billion. The high asset intensive areas are primarily for water and sewer services, transit, and transportation, which includes roads. The bulk of the capital budget for tax-supported services is for the renewal, replacement of aging infrastructure. The remainder is for growth, new infrastructure, which is primarily funded by development charges. Next slide. As you can see in this graph, 62.5% of capital funding comes from cash reserves, which are put aside as a capital contribution from the operating budget annually. The remainder of the capital program is funded by debt, funding from other levels of government, and development charges. Next slide. This slide highlights the fact that there is very little discretion to reduce spending for many of the city's services. The police budget is tabled separately, and council does not have discretion to make line item changes. They can only approve or reject the budget in its entirety. Budget directions in other areas like transit, fire, paramedics, and roads must be accompanied by changes in service standards. There is also a long list of services or expenditures where there is no discretion because these services are mandated, regulated, or mandatory, such as long-term care, public health, housing, and debt charges. There is a little more discretion in areas funded by fees, where the fees can be increased to recover the cost of delivering the service, or in areas where there are no specific service standards or for administrative support services. Next slide. So council approved the budget directions for 2023, which are summarized here. The municipal tax target was set at 2.5% overall, which includes citywide levy, Ottawa Police Services, and transit levy at 2.5%. Annual additional taxation revenues from growth is forecasted at 2.2%, which is over and above the 2.5%. Rate programs increase revenue by 4.2% overall as per the long-range financial plan for water, wastewater, and stormwater. User fees and charges increase in accordance with the fiscal framework or long-range financial plan, including incremental COVID-19 cost recovery. The capital budget is developed in accordance with the direction outlined in the 2019 DC background study and the long-range financial plan and fiscal framework. Next slide. So this slide highlights the steps and timelines for the 2023 budget process. Because of the 2022 election, the timeline differs from the typical process you would see in other years. The budget directions report was approved on December 7th, 2022. All budgets were tabled on February 1st, 2023. In February 2023, individual budgets for each committee, board, and commission will be reviewed. It's at these meetings that the public has the opportunity to provide feedback and input on the budget via public delegations. Individual committees have the flexibility to make recommendations to make budget changes that could be funded from reductions in other committee budgets. The budget will be approved as a whole on March 1st, 2023. Next slide. So this is a list of the budget meetings at which public delegations can provide input and recommendations. The list can be found on the city's website and is updated if there are any changes made to the dates. And next slide. And there are several resources available to you and ways that you can provide input to the budget throughout the year. Engage Ottawa provides a comprehensive online engagement platform that allows you to connect with the city in an interactive manner. To provide input, you can complete the online survey or contact your councillor. You can also get additional information on the city's website at ottawa.ca/budget. All feedback is reviewed and considered. Your participation in this public meeting today is greatly appreciated, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have on this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isabel, for the in-depth presentation and setting the kind of the framework that council has to work with in terms of setting a budget. We do have Sophia Jacob, who undertakes community liaising on behalf of my office on the call. And I've asked her to help moderate this session. And I know that we did get one question in the chat so far, but we encourage people to obviously ask questions about your concerns about the budget and what you'd like to see in future budgets, which is actually quite important. Part of the process around the anti-racism strategy is ensuring that we have input. So we have a member from city staff who's actually note-taking to determine what is the residents' interests in terms of changes or additions or areas of focus for the budget. So this process is very important for us. So we do encourage you to ask as many questions as possible for the time that we have here, and we'll endeavor to answer them since we do have city staff here. So I will hand it over to Sophia to moderate some of the incoming questions.
Okay, thanks everyone. I'll start with the question in the chat. And I believe it's how much money is earmarked from the City of Ottawa for the First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people, not what Canadian federal budget gives to Ottawa. So I don't know if Isabel can answer that question.
I can try. I just opened it up here. So I don't know the details inside the budget, but I do have line by line in terms of what's been increased this year. And we do have $150,000 for Indigenous relations, additional investments to work in collaboration with Indigenous leadership, establish relationship agreements, protocols, and engagement frameworks to ensure the integration of Indigenous perspectives. And there's also $500,000. Oh, and that included an additional FTE. And then there's $500,000 social development and funding, additional investment to increase capacity and sustainability funding for Indigenous service providers through the community funding framework.
And if I can just quickly say as well, obviously with the anti-racism strategy, there will be a focus on disaggregated data so that we would have even greater data points for decision making. So we just want you to know that that's an important component, because if we don't measure, it's hard for us to manage. And obviously we also want to use that as a tool to determine where gaps are in terms of budgeting and budget focus. So just want you to know that the idea behind the strategy is also to improve the quality of data so that we can make more quality investments in different areas that benefit Indigenous communities, Black communities, and racialized communities.
Thank you, Councillor. Lou is up next.
Thank you. And thank you for holding this session for the public to ask some questions. My name is Lou, and I am an immigrant settler of color, and I work at a local emergency shelter. In 2021, 55% of the respondents to the City of Ottawa's homelessness point-in-time count identified as racialized, and 32% of people experiencing homelessness identified as Indigenous. That being said, the money allocated to affordable housing in the budget remains the same since before the pandemic and since after the city has declared a housing and homelessness emergency. What is the city's plan to ensure safe, accessible, and affordable housing for those of us that are most vulnerable? And more specifically, what are we planning to do to reduce the 5-year wait time for services like Ottawa Community Housing and rent geared towards income? Thank you.
Well, that's a great question. Maybe I'll start off first and then pass it over to Isabel. But from the political side, I think it's important for us to really focus on greater advocacy and also on the anti-racism strategy, where we heard very clearly in terms of the consultations that immigrant communities, newcomer communities, as well as Black communities, Indigenous communities, obviously want a focus on improved housing and especially deeply affordable housing. So the city does have a housing and a 10-year housing and homelessness plan, but from the political side, I think that that can be improved. I want to ensure that we are moving towards more deeply affordable housing. So we are in deep conversations and working in tandem, especially with the federal government, around emerging rapid housing initiatives that ideally municipalities can take advantage of. So colleagues around the table, around the council table, including myself, are having conversations with city staff on how we can really take advantage of these opportunities. But key for us, obviously, is building, having a housing first strategy, trying to build as much new housing as possible. And that does require not just readjustment, in my estimation, from my political perspective of the budget, but it also requires a tremendous amount of a downstream funding that would come from senior levels of government. There are senior levels of government, the federal government, that's at the table. And right now it's a question, especially when I look at the rapid housing initiative, of the criteria, ensuring that we can have enough projects come through the pipeline that can qualify to the criteria. And so that is something that I've seen on files that applicants are working through. But I would agree with you that we have a housing crisis, we have a housing affordability crisis, and being politically the member of council that seconded that motion, around declaring a housing emergency, I agree with you that we need to really exponentially grow those investments. So at the political side, we're going to continue to advocate at the highest levels. I've talked to MPs, to my local MP, to the Black Parliamentary Caucus about ensuring that we have more investments generally in housing, and also specifically for racialized, Indigenous, and Black communities that are culturally specific. So I just want you to know that we are working on that advocacy. And now I will pass it to Isabel to talk about the initiatives that are within the budget.
Yeah, so I'm going to speak specifically from the financial side. We developed a long-range financial plan for the first time for housing. I think it was a couple of years ago now, and that's where the 15 million came up. And we were looking at the 10-year time frame. So when you say the amount isn't going up every year, we'd looked at what do we need for the next 10 years. And we divided that by those 10 years. So it's an amount, 15 million per year, to get to the target of the 500 units per year. But that also assumes 2/3 funding from other levels of government. So that's our 1/3. And we're expecting 2/3 from other levels of government. So as Councillor mentioned, we need to keep advocating for other levels of government to support us. And it's not just the capital investments, it's the programs. So we also, in that long-range financial plan, asked for financial support from the province for a lot of the supports required to support affordable housing. The other thing is we're also looking for other sources of revenue. So for example, the vacant unit tax that just came out, that is supposed to be directed to affordable housing. housing, and then 25% of our surplus land sales go to affordable housing. So we're continuously looking for ways to keep supplementing that $15 million.
Thank you, Isabel.
And I would just say, just quickly, just last statement that, it's not enough. We would want to see more, but it has been utilized to catalyze different projects. And so we're able to take that $15 million, and there is a multiplier effect, as Isabel has said, because we take it as a capital investment. We match investments from other senior levels of government, investments that can be loans, grants. And I was able to take advantage of that in the previous term, $15 million. And now we see a $100 million plus project under construction, 271 units in Wateridge Village. So the way it works is it's a payment that works as a catalyst. The challenge as well, of course, in this high inflation environment is that, as we know, you have cash. $15 million today is not what it was worth before and what it will be worth next year. And so, that is part of the challenge is ensuring that those dollars go further to catalyze more investment. However, I fully agree with what Lou was saying and the fact that we do need more investments and we need to advocate for more. And politically, I think we should be trying to allocate for more investments as well.
Thank you, Councillor. Up next is Ade, and then Michelle.
Yes, hello. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so on January 19th, I received some falsehoods that Council referred the police complaints transparency or delegation of misconduct investigations to the Auditor General. The third issue was human rights review of complaints. And the fourth issue was detask the police. So for Council to pass a motion that should be considered by the police board. The falsehood is that it would require referral to Ontario. So I addressed that falsehood, and then on February 3, I received a response saying our professional city staff and a reference to legal fact that police boards and not council oversee policing. So, from my perspective, and I'm sure that, the city is doing some good work on anti-racism, but from my perspective, any racist can profit off Black slave trade pre-existing disadvantages of lower credibility. City staff are generally repeating what Justice Horrigan warned them not to do, which is to justify the wrongful withholding of information retroactively and dishonestly in order to mislead council. So for me, from my perspective, this is tantamount to city staff putting their knees on the necks of the Black community and visible minorities. So, my question would be, would you commit to publicly release the results of a staff inquiry to the following grounds? Toronto City Council did an $11 million police pilot, not the police board. Toronto City Council passed that motion. And right now they passed another motion examining completely removing 911 services from the police. And this is what staff is telling us Ottawa City Council cannot even consider. So obviously it's false because Toronto did it. Within Ontario Regulation 399, it says criminal investigations must be done by the police, but every other policing duty can be detasked 35% cheaper to non-police officers. And this is a quintessential issue on the Ottawa board business plan. So, and then within the same regulation, it says if the municipal council chooses, they can have joint determination and participation of the police board's business plan. And then within the police board's business plan, it includes crime prevention, community patrol, community satisfaction, emergency calls, road safety, resource planning. So when the regulation is saying that the board has to agree with council on this joint determination, how then can staff be telling council they can't even discuss it? Again, within the same regulation, it says that the board must enter into an agreement with the municipal council that addresses
so
not just their
Ade,
business.
can I just cut you for one quick second? Can we get to the question that you'd like to ask? If there's a question, or if you have, and then we can get the councillor or Isabel to follow up, but can you get to the direct question that you'd like to ask?
Well, I appreciate the interruption, but I'll say this, I'll round up in 2 minutes. But these are very important points. And the context from which I'm coming from, I'm not coming off this code. I'm coming off the context that council has already been misled that they cannot discuss the issues that I am raising. And so what I'm basically proving is that within the regulation and based on what Toronto City Council has done, it is possible. And so the last point I was about to make was that within the regulation, it says that council is to agree with the board, and the council is to agree on the content of not just the business plan, but the annual report, and the dates by which it must be made public. And then within the annual report itself, it includes also complaints, the chief summary of complaints. So the bottom line is that council has a veto on the content of the business plan and the annual report. So these arguments that I've put forward and asking for commitment, that rather than just saying, the Black Ade Olumide is lying, why don't we have public disclosure? Why don't you submit an inquiry to the staff on these grounds that I am raising, that council has jurisdiction to discuss and debate and pass the motion that I'm requesting? And then let's see what the city staff who are calling me a liar, let's see what they have to say to these grounds I have raised.
I'm just gonna stop you there. So I'll let Councillor King answer you. And if Isabel, if you have anything to chime in with, they can, but we'll have to wrap you there for now, Ade, because we have other people waiting in line. So we'll just get Councillor King to respond as much as you can, Councillor.
Sure, absolutely. So there is a question around jurisdiction. I think Isabel said very clearly in her presentation that the City Council simply says yes or no, has the power of saying yes or no to a police services budget as submitted. It's the Police Services Board that has jurisdiction over the community direction, not the operations, not the operational control over the police service in terms of law enforcement, but basically setting the wider community objectives. If there are going to be any elements of back and forth between City Council and the board, those would be typically precipitated by the board. And I'm thinking of when I sat on the board last year and helped, in a sense, engineer the redirection of $2.1 billion to social services. So we actually reduced the police services budget. And the way that works is that as a board member and as a board, we had the power to ultimately control the line items. And we found enough efficiencies for investments, as example, in programs for racialized youth. So that's the way that it works jurisdictionally. I actually did submit an inquiry when I first came to council, might have been in 2020, to the city solicitor, asking about the potential for police reform and what tools council had. And so the response that was provided was one more fact, and it really described the process that as a city councillor, I'm not directing any element of operations around the police. I'm not directing, since I do not sit on the police services board right now, I'm not, directing any element of those policies. we can comment obviously as elected officials in terms of our perspective. And I think one of the perspectives that we do share and that I've gone on record on is that, I support the idea of detasking, because I don't believe that the police service should be engaged in, public health things that should be done by public health professionals. We want to, at the end of the day, reduce the size of the police service by addressing social issues with social services and funding from that social service envelope. So that's and I've been very clear about that. I think people understand my perspective, and it's a realistic one, noting the fact that there is a legislated responsibility for the municipalities to have police services, but that those police services are governed by police service boards. And in fact, I'll just leave it here with this element which is absolutely new. I think it just was released officially in terms of a presentation to the Police Services Board, the audit of the convoy and the actions of the Police Services Board, and as well as the police service and the city. So there were 3 reports that were issued. And after reading the reports, there's some clear elements of that report that really emphasize that the police service should not be politicized. And it was in the context of some of the debates, the raucous debates that happened during the convoy at City Council, where certain council members actually tried to influence and demand reports from the board. The auditor report said that that's not appropriate, and that's politicization of the police service operations, because the city council is supposed to simply deal in terms of the budget with approving it or disapproving it. So I'll leave it there, but thank you for the question.
Wonderful. Isabel, do you have anything to add? If not, I'll go to the next person. Nothing to add?
No, thank you.
Michelle, and then it'll be Robin.
Hi. Yesterday I was on social media and somebody was asking for groceries. That was, if anybody had any extra groceries. It's February 8th. Today, the 9th. And this person, I know the family because I used to be a community developer, and this person has no history of drugs or alcohol within the family. It was an emergency, disabled, et cetera, et cetera. I'm looking at more and more people that are struggling to get groceries, just on a general basis. But another thing that really bothers me, being a First Nations person, is that we have our own foods, especially the Inuit. And I'm wanting to know when the city is going to start making deals with the North and helping Inuit receive their foods that they need within their own culture, because their food is very much directed towards behaviors, the way they need that food is basically what I'm saying. And it's hard enough for First Nations people to get any food anywhere from anyone else other than our own. But for the Inuit, it's even worse because it's more expensive to have this money, to have this stuff sent for them to be able to eat. So I'm asking where the city is going to find the funds and start making that partnership just to make it a little easier. And towards the anti-racism program, it's a wonderful concept, except you're the only person of color that represents Ottawa. So this anti-racism has to look a little bit more than just the words on a piece of paper. And that's what I have to say for now. Miigwech.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that intervention. I agree on both items. So one of the things that was identified in the anti-racism strategy is the idea of culturally sensitive and relevant social service provision. And so what would that mean? That would mean that Inuit who might need to access food services should have access to country food. So I fully agree with that. I think that's the direction in terms of the report and the thinking. And obviously we need to see more investments to make that happen. To your second point, and I'm just going to link it, representation matters. So, I was only elected in 2019. First month, there was a lot of elation, first Black city councillor. The next month, there was a lot of deflation because in my community, somebody had the N-word spray painted on their garage door. I see people on the call who were there supporting the family. I'm thinking of Robin Brown and Sophia Jacob, who are on the call. And they turned to me, frankly, on that day, right in the driveway of the family and said, Councillor King, you're new. Are you going to support an anti-racism office that could ultimately undertake this work? And I said, yes. And we didn't know if we could do it, but we consulted with the community to have areas of focus. So it was the community that drove the areas of focus. And we were able to establish that office, which is now trying to apply an anti-racism lens to all the policies, all the programs, and all the services. Will that happen overnight? Of course not. But the key for me, and this is the important key, is that we have an office that is embedded in the city. So you're absolutely right. I don't plan on getting hit by a Mack truck tomorrow. But if I'm hit by that Mack truck, I know that the city will continue to work on these issues. And where I appreciate your comments, and I completely agree, is I think that we will reach success when there isn't a Black person at the table or Asian person at the table. There might just be all white people at the table, but they are advocating as hard for equity as if it was a Black person or an Indigenous person or an Asian person. So that would be the hope. And that takes time. If we're on a journey towards greater equity, that's going to take time. But I think, at least as an expression of an organization, I am pleased that the idea of the anti-racism secretariat, the idea of the strategy, has been unanimously embraced by councillors, by city council. Every time I've been around the table, people aren't asking questions about curtailing it. They're asking questions about enhancing it. And even with a new council and a new mayor, he had said that that was one of his priorities, which I thought was refreshing. We might have political differences, we always will, and we always do on multiple issues. But I think that there is the goodwill there to move on. But as you're saying, and I hear you and I believe you on this, goodwill is not enough. Ultimately, there needs to be action. And that's my hope. With governments, you have to have the frameworks to put action into place. So I think that we have a good framework. It's going to continue to evolve. It was completely informed by the community, and it'll continue to evolve based on community input. And that's the point of having these dialogues. So I don't want you to think, you're just talking in circles. We actually have city staff members who are noting these issues through the lens of anti-racism, and who will take it back to staff so that as budgets continue to evolve, this one, and as we have future budgets, we have a better understanding of what the priorities are so that we can allocate a greater number of resources to more diverse communities. So I just want you to know that I agree with you. I'm there with you. And that's what I'm trying to do, is advocate on your behalf to have a vision of the city where the inclusivity isn't completely dependent upon one person, because it shouldn't be.
Thank you, Councillor. We have Robin, and then we have a question in the chat, and then I'll take the next hand.
Hey, thanks, Sophia. Hey, Rawlson. Actually, first I want to say thanks to folks who have come out tonight and are engaging, asking questions. That's great. Thanks to you, Rawlson, for holding this. Good to hear that there's an extra $250,000 for the anti-racism secretariat, and to hear the explicit Black references, so explicit references to anti-Black racism. All right, my comments are coming fully hearing you, what you're saying in terms of you being a councillor, and this is on the police budget, all you can do is vote yes or no. I hear you. This is what we're talking about. So the OPS budget is one of the four, as the Isabel mentioned, one of the four biggest items in the budget, right? The OPS is asking for another 15 million bucks. Okay. Now, let's take a look at last year. This is despite the convoy, where the OPS stood around and did nothing for 3 weeks. Then we had our only Black police chief who was forced to resign, and a racist narrative was leaked about him being an angry Black man running around abusing senior staff, and that's why they were standing around for 3 weeks. Then we had the OCDSB defeat a motion to bring back the SRO program, right? Because they got rid of it last year because they did a human rights-based evaluation that found out that it was harming students. Then they released the use of force data, the OPS, right, revealing that they use force disproportionately on Black, Indigenous, and Middle Eastern people. Then we had the high school demo, right, the dress code demo, where they went and arrested a white kid on camera. Then they hired Chief Stubbs, who's the guy who's in charge of the BC RCMP that violently removed the Wet'suwet'en people from their land, okay? And the whole year ended with, and this is the most important stat, with the OPS is their own stats showing they only spend 1% of their time, or actually less than 1%, on priority 1 calls. Right? Priority 1 calls are the ones where there's imminent bodily harm. They're basically the violent crime calls. 99% of the time, 99% of the time, they're doing directing traffic, babysitting construction sites, or going to mental health calls with the people they're supposed to help or ended up, as we know, ending up dead, right? So Ottawa is very safe according to their own stats. With that money, they want to buy more tasers, body cams, build the $178 million cell facility. And here's a key point. And they want to hire more officers, especially diverse ones, right? Yet, having more diverse officers didn't stop 5 Black Memphis police officers from beating Tyree Nichols to death last month, right? Now, the OPS issued a statement condemning those officers, supposedly because the OPS would never have their officers being caught on video viciously beating a Black man who later died, except Abdi Rahman Abdi. Right? So more diverse officers don't change policing, it changes them, right? And it changes them even if they work for nice or units with nice euphemistic names like the Street Scorpion, the Street Crime and Operation to Restore Peace in Our Neighborhood. Those are the guys who killed Tyree Nichols, or the Neighborhood Resource Teams, right? It changes them, right? Body cams, which are this current chief is pushing for, although Chief Slowly didn't. Chief Slowly was evidence-based. He said, there's no evidence that body cams do anything, right? Our Chief Stubbs is pushing for those. So the money's going to the OPS, $400 million. It's not going to things that actually make it safer, like, as Lou mentioned, housing, mental health supports, domestic violence, and climate change, right? You're right. The OPSB, the board, has the one, they do the line-by-line thing. But this current board has shown itself to be completely in lockstep with the OPS. They're rubber stamping everything. In fact, what they're doing right now is doing everything to limit public participation, right? They're pushing public delegations to a separate meeting at noon. They are limiting it to people who haven't spoken in the last 3 months, clearly targeting activists like myself who speak every month, right? So they're going to rubber stamp the budget. So my ask is very clear, Rawlson. We need you to vote against it. We need you to vote, to use your vote to say no, you and all the progressive councillors to vote no against that budget and send it back and say no. We need to freeze that budget, right? Freeze that budget and take that money and put it towards things that actually make it safer, including climate change, by the way.
Councillor, did you want to respond?
Well, I think that Robin knows where I stand. You know, I was on Police Services Board and re-elected to council with a more progressive vision of investments in communities rather than the investment of last resort, which is law enforcement. I tell people this, and I'm very honest about it. I go line by line through the budget before I make a determination. And one of the reasons why, you know, when I was on Police Services Board, I voted against the first budget was because I felt that we weren't listening to the community. So I was very clear about that. So I was the one dissenting vote on the Police Services Board. The next year, I did vote for the Police Services Board budget, and that was because we were able, I moved the motion that affected efficiencies and a change so that money could be redirected to the City Council to be utilized for community services. So my views are very clear. We have a legislative framework which says the police service is not going to disappear. You know, it's written into the legislation that we have to have effective policing in the municipality. But it is my preference, and this is one thing that I ran on. I said I ran on to a platform in 2019 to ensure that we were able to bring more dollars into social services so that we can provide real opportunities for our youth. You know, I would rather see dollars going in, because the investment's incredible, the investments in our youth, rather than seeing exponential growth in law enforcement. So I've just been very clear in my position, but being an elected official, dealing with a $5 billion budget, I think the onus is on me to review every segment, every proposed dollar that's spent before I make a determination. Listen to all of the deliberations. I do that. I was at Transit Commission today. I monitor if I'm not participating. I continue to monitor the Police Services Board to determine if there are changes. And what I can say is, when I was around the table, we were within the context and within the mechanisms available to us. I was trying to affect the reform that was possible within the very kind of constrained framework of the Police Services Act, the Police Services Board, and the way it works. But you know, we do need substantive change, and I think one of the guiding principles for me, and I'll leave it there on this answer, is listening to the community. So, you know, I sat down in that first budget and listened to over 100 delegations before I made a decision. And we'll continue to listen to the community. And this is why we're having forums like this. And then ultimately, based on that information and data, you know, I make a decision in terms of the votes. But I don't prejudge in terms of how I will vote until we do full analysis and we hear from everybody. And that's the key as well. So police services will still have its finance and governance or its finance committee, ultimately hearing finance and audit, I believe we'll hear from the community, and I'll be listening, going through the documentation. I'll be talking directly with police leadership, and then as usual, we'll make a decision. But you have a sense of you know, what my political approach, philosophy, and understanding is. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to take a question from the chat. Is the city using past studies and reports from community-based organizations? Example, the Somerset West Community Health Center, to which I belong, has published several recent reports on racial discrimination, and they should be considered by the city in terms of fundings. Comment, please.
So I will defer to Isabella on that question, if you feel comfortable.
No, I my area is finance, so I wouldn't know the answer to that question, unfortunately.
What I can say, of course, is that we are engaged in disaggregated data collection, and that will obviously involve a historical data collection. Somerset West Community Health Center, I know, is a great partner of the city, along with all the community resource and health centers. So I feel assured that they would be accessing that data in terms of you know, their data collection that would eventually feed into policy direction. So I would rest assured that there would probably be good use of historical data for sure, not just with the Ottawa neighborhood study as an example, but with all community partners who feed into that data set.
Fantastic. Thank you, Councillor. Brenda, and then we'll go back to the chat.
Interestingly enough, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sorry. Interestingly enough, if you don't mind that I just make a comment, it wasn't my question, and then I'll go to my question. It just so happens that I'm the co-chair of the Ottawa People's Commission, okay? And interestingly enough, I'm just going to share this. The vast majority of people that weren't let into the red zone, whether it be the Good Companion Center, Somerset community, whatever, were people from marginalized communities. Okay, so I'm just saying there's a whole lot of work that still needs to be done. And understand, sir, you're doing a fabulous job. Please don't, but it's just a comment that I feel I had a responsibility to make.
Absolutely. And one thing I just want to, I'm not cutting you off here, but the Finance and Corporate Services Committee took a direction from Councillor Gower this week to ensure that the reports from the People's Commission are actually placed on the record with the city's audit reports that will be coming back and other exercises. So we just want you to know that there was, at the political level, some direction to say the work that the People's Commission has done is valued. I've read the report, and I'm looking forward to the second report that will come out. And I think that we have to ensure that that informs any future response to emergencies, and just informs, the general socioeconomic approach that we take. So I just want you to know that.
Okay, thank you. Is it a question? Is it a comment I have? Okay, I've worked too long with Michelle and so many people here in this room, and it's the issue of housing, sir. I also am with the Centertown Community Association. We have a housing affordability working group. It just brings us to tears each month when we have these sessions. We just had a session on rooming houses. It's deplorable, okay, what some of these landlords are doing to people. And many people in these rooming homes are part of our marginalized community. Everybody is talking, but where is the help for the people in need? And I know it's a rhetorical question, but I have to say it. I won't be able to put my head on the pillow at night. It's just, you like to think this is Canada, this country that has all of this, and yet we still have this major housing crisis. I live downtown. All around me is empty office buildings. I will never understand why some of these can't be converted to help people get them off the street. And everybody has every reason as to why it can't happen, but it's happening in all kinds of cities across Canada. Why isn't it happening here? So, I think that, I can't remember the name of the young lady who said 55% of our homeless people are marginalized, 35% are Indigenous, okay? These numbers, we need to bring the people inside. And I guess I'm just wanting to comment that anything and everything we all can do to try and force our councillors to make this a priority. I don't know how 3 years ago we said this was an emergency, and there's no increase in numbers at all of getting people inside. So that's my comment from my heart, but it just needed to be said.
We appreciate the comment. I share your sentiments. I am as frustrated as you are. I think the good news is that the federal government has stepped up with a rapid housing initiative, which is designed to convert buildings. With this new council, there's a greater urgency. So just at this last council meeting on Wednesday, Councillor Troster, in conjunction with, I believe, the mayor, moved a motion around expediting conversions of commercial buildings to residential. And there have been some successful projects, not specifically in my ward, because we need to identify buildings that would be applicable to this new grant program to really speed up housing people and speed up conversions. I know that there are grant applications in my ward that are underway, which I'm excited about. But in Ottawa-Vanier, there have been some projects where some buildings have been converted. So we just want you to know that I share the immediacy, the need for the immediacy of really resolving this issue. We share it every day because we also get the direct calls. Our office staff hear from people all the time who are on waiting lists, who need housing. And I share with you the sentiment that housing is a right. It shouldn't just be looked at as a financialized asset that will allow people to retire. People need homes. We have too many people, increasingly unsheltered residents in our city, and we have too many people on waiting lists. And so I think in this term of council, you're going to see more action from especially a new set of councillors who really want to see immediacy in terms of action, immediacy in terms of ensuring that people are moved from temporary housing arrangements and shelters directly into homes. And I think that there's going to be an added push from council on staff politically to do that. So I just want you to know that I do share your concerns, and we are trying to affect them every day at council.
Perfect. Thank you, Councillor. The next question is about universal income. There was a lot of talk about universal income last year. Is that now coming back to the forefront?
Well, I'll just be very brief on that. Universal supports are not within the programmatic realm of the city. City can't afford that. That would be something that would have to come from the provincial government. Under a different provincial government, there was a pilot project that unfortunately was canceled when we undertook a advocacy document around the creation of a poverty reduction strategy, which I'm very proud of. Community members in Ward 13 actually came together to provide support and advocate and help my office author a position paper on it. I said politically I'd be supportive of those types of supports, but it's important to understand that would come from a higher level of government because that type of programming would not be able to be supported from the property tax base through a budget that needs to, by law, be balanced every year.
Okay, we do have a lot of questions coming up. I'm just going to ask that everybody make their question short because we will be wrapping in the next 20 minutes or so. So I will take Lou and then I will take Ken.
Hello, and thank you again. I want to say thank you, Councillor, for understanding the urgent need for affordable housing in the city. And I would like to direct your attention to some of those immediate changes that will have no cost to the budget that include things like banning demevictions and renovictions in the city. Thank you.
Well, I'm definitely open to that prospect, and I'll talk to my colleagues about that. So we've noted that.
Thank you, Councillor. Ken?
Yes, let me just turn on my camera a little bit here. All right, first of all, thank you, Rawlson, for having this platform for the community to hear the budget and to have voice. This is something that is very much appreciated. My question is actually based on the very first question that was asked at the beginning, which was about how much was hallmarked in the budget towards First Nation, Inuit, and Métis. And I want to ask the same question, but directly towards the African Caribbean community. Based on the stats that I've seen, there's over 100,000 people of African Caribbean descent that lives in Ottawa, Gatineau area. And in terms of housing, jobs, there's always been a lot of challenges and barriers facing that particular community. So I want to know the budget that was tabled by the city of Ottawa, just as they have allocated or hallmarked some money for First Nation, Inuit, and Métis, are there any of that money hallmarked for the Black community that is also facing a lot of challenges and a lot of barriers? And I'm wondering maybe Isabel can probably say something towards that, or maybe.
Yeah. I will defer to Isabel, but the one thing I will say is that as a jumpstart, because you have to remember this is the first budget of a new council. We are operating under the former council's term of term of council priorities. We actually have to set new priorities. But even before that occurred, the Racism Secretariat said, let's look at programs around housing pilot for Black families. So even before we were able to really do a full policy analysis, and that's important. The data is important. You have to remember that we just passed this strategy in the summer. And now we're only 2 months into the new council term, and we have almost like a caretaker's budget in a sense, compressed timeline based on some of the priorities in the past. It's going to be important for future priorities to ensure that we fully apply the anti-racism lens, and we talk about the diversification of social services in terms of culturally relevant and sensitive programming. So that will take time. So I can probably safely say that I'm not aware if we have breakouts that way. The idea is we want to get there. And we also want to hear from community members as to what the emphasis should be for these elements to translate those recommendations in the report to action. So that's the thinking. I don't think at this point, I looked at the budget and I'm not seeing a breakdown that way. Of course, I can't scan and search the budget the way that finance staff can. I get the physical book and the PDF that everybody gets, and it's public record. However, I know that the anti-racism office wants us to go in that direction. Ken.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. The program directors know the details and line items of what's in there, but I can only see what's been new added this year. And so I couldn't speak to that, unfortunately.
What I can say as well is that obviously some of the programming would be around community services. So one of the things we can suggest, and I know that Isabel did that at the top of the session, was ask or tell people about how to participate. This is one way, and your questions will have weight because, as I said, they're being noted. But there's the capacity to ask about programming or make asks for investments in programming through public delegations at committee. And key committees include, I guess, for you, Ken, Community Services Committee, really kind of bringing up these issues as council debates the contents of the budget. So I think that's important. Or obviously contacting my office if you have specific items. We try to go through everything and respond typically to what's actionable. But we're happy to take those suggestions back, not just through the political level, but also to relay that to the anti-racism office itself.
Thank you, Councillor. There's another question from the chat. It's with the expansion of Ottawa and all of this new housing going up, what deals has the city made with the corporation for a certain percentage to be affordable housing?
So there's a structure there where we cannot actually compel affordability. And you have to remember the city is a creature of the province, and the province has just undertaken a wholesale overhaul of the planning elements that the city deals with through Bill 23. So there's a challenge there, but typically, I can ask developers, and I do every time we have major projects that come into the ward to make them affordable projects. Ideally, ask them whether they are rental. Ask them, if they are catering, especially if they're in the inner core, to an urban lifestyle. So there are things that we can ask for, but through many of the rules, we can't compel. There were rules around buildings or developments in transit-oriented developments that are within a scope of higher order transit, so mass transit. So if you're within about a kilometer radius, 700 or 800-meter radius from a major transit station, there can be some tools to compel affordable housing, and that's called inclusionary zoning. But with some of the changes to Bill 23, we will have to see how effective those tools will remain. So the reality for me, and this is political commentary, is that if we want to ensure that we have more deeply affordable housing built in the city, that has to be done, in my estimation, by the public sector. Public or nonprofit sectors with a mission to provide deeply affordable housing, because if we leave it to the market, it's just not going to happen. It's not an ideological answer, it's just an observation. The business models don't make it as lucrative to have long holds in rental stock versus selling condos. So that's one of the realities, is that there needs to be greater investment there. We're continuing to advocate for that, but we obviously need our provincial partners at the table in order to ensure that there is investment there. Because even with inclusionary zoning, the model has to work. You can't compel the developer to build. So they're going to build based on the model that is the most profitable for them. So the reality is that the province has to recommit to getting into the business of building public housing, in my estimation, to ensure that there's deep affordability for many residents who just can't afford what's out there in the market.
Thank you, Councillor. So we're close to the top of the hour. Ade, you do have the last question, and then we're going to have final remarks from Councillor King.
Yes, I will just say, that I'm sure that the city is doing a lot of good work when it comes to anti-racism. I'm just speaking from my experience, okay? So from my experience, I have raised this issue. I was speaking with the city manager, and I had a very senior city staff interrupt and start yelling at me. And I don't see staff react that way to white activists. So I don't understand why staff would feel it's okay to treat Black activists that way. Now, so with that perspective, I want to restate my question, because I'm not sure if Councillor King heard my question. Ontario Regulation 3-99, which I did not write, Section 32(1)(a), says the board shall enter into a protocol with the municipal council that addresses the business plan and the annual report.
So I'll leave it there, because I think that this is not a budget question, but and this is the last comment on this. Just on the basis of what you said the board needs to enter into an arrangement with council. And so, I'm just, when I was talking to you about the inquiry, that's just a matter of fact. The fact is that, and it's just been very clearly enumerated here, that we vote yes or no on the Police Services Board budget. Any other element of police governance is governed by the police board. And so that would require a discussion that is initiated by the police board with council. Otherwise, I think other people here on this call want to deal with budget questions, and we only have 5 minutes. So I just want to get back to maybe one or two questions and then wrap up.
Okay, so we'll continue. I'm going to look at the chat. There's a comment: how does the city expect transit to be self-sufficient when people cannot afford rent or food or basic needs? Transit is a privilege these days, and not so much one when it doesn't work. If you wanted to comment on that, Councillor.
Yeah, so we don't expect transit to be self-sufficient. The reality, if you're asking from, and this is more of a political question, we have to have a balance between the money that comes in from tax revenue and the money that comes in from the fare box in order to actually afford running a service. One of the big challenges, of course, is that the government, senior levels of government have kind of stepped back from really providing a better amount of operational funding. So there has been, and this is just a trend across the board, whether it's with housing or other areas. The reality is that much of the money that comes into the city through grants or through loan programs often deal with capital investments. The challenge then is to continue to maintain those investments and to be able to undertake their operations. I was very supportive in the last term of council, politically motions that asked for increased operating expenses to be covered by senior levels of government. I think that if senior levels of government come in and make those investments, they're quality investments, not just in terms of improving mobility in the city, but also, addressing climate change. If we're investing in mass transit rather than private vehicular transportation, we are going to really improve the quality of the environment. So these are things that we really need to undertake. But I would just say to you, we need to see more funding. We need to make those asks. It can't all come because of the scale and scope of the expenses. And I was on Transit Commission asking questions today, have a long meeting. We see a massive budget there, and that budget can't come all from the taxpayer. It's divided by the fare box, and the smallest and the continuing shrinking portion is often operational dollars from the senior levels of government. So that's the ask, and we'll continue to ask it at the political level, and hopefully direct staff to continue to make that ask and advocate for more resources so that we can improve the quality and the reliability of the transit service.
Thank you, Councillor. So folks, we are at the top of the hour, and that is the end of our Q&A. I am going to encourage you, if this is not your specific ward, because we're here for racialized communities, I do encourage you to go to your city council wards to be able to do the budget consultation as well and ask your questions. Thank you so much, Isabel, for coming. We appreciate that. And I will allow Councillor King to give his wrap up.
Well, I really want to thank you for your inputs, for the dialogue, the good dialogue today, and for feeding into this process. I really think it is important for residents from all communities to participate in the process so that you can be heard, so that there's an understanding of the deep needs in communities, and so that can be relayed to council, relayed through committees, relayed to staff, so that we can actually generate the policies necessary to enable action. And so this is always a good first step. I encourage you to take more steps, to contact your city councilors, to make deputations. I know that there are a number of different social groups in the community that are actually holding workshops on how to make deputations at council. They're very important because we need to hear your voice in order to make the most meaningful changes that ultimately affect everybody's lives in the city. So I really appreciate the time that you've taken. I appreciate Isabel for the time that she has taken. We have very hardworking staff at City Hall and throughout the city who are experiencing their most busiest month in terms of dealing with a very sophisticated budget, $5 billion of spending, a lot of mandated spending, and a tremendous number of needs in the community. So we appreciate the fact that you've provided a very in-depth presentation. I really appreciate the inputs that we've received from the community. And throughout the month, we're going to continue to take inputs all the way to the final budget deliberations at the beginning of March. So thank you so much and have a wonderful evening.